I hope you'll excuse me. I am in bed. I'm a bit tired, but I don't think I can let this one go. I think it's very important. Now, before I get into the main video, I'm going to start off on a lighter note, actually. Um, the planets are set to align tonight across the skies of the United Kingdom. I had a look out earlier, and it was a very bright star. It's often said that that's Venus, but I think actually in this situation it may have been Jupiter. I don't know. There was also a star with a reddish hue, so I'm thinking Mars. In urban areas, it won't be as clear, but anyway, I discovered recently that the great astronomer Sir William Herschel, who's credited with discovering the planet Uranus, or at least identifying it as a planet, um, visited Sunderland in 1761. So today we had a blue plaque unveiled. My dad was at a special concert because he was also a composer. So anyway, that's just a bit of related trivia regarding that. So I think what we've seen today is utterly astonishing. Um, we saw President Zelensky in the White House basically ambushed by Trump and Vance. That's the only way to describe it. It was very tense, heated, and I struggle to think of another scene like that. The only one that comes to mind is when Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer confronted Trump. That was fairly tense. But I think this was even more palpable. It was more. Um, it was shocking, and I really, really think what we're seeing is decline of American leadership in real time. Now, there's some things that really need to be put out there. This is doing the round. This is getting a lot of coverage on social media, and there's it's today's big story. Um, there's a few things that really need to be clarified. This allegation that Vance made or Trump made, I can't tell the difference at the moment. One of them said that Zelensky is ungrateful. This is simply not true. President Zelensky has repeatedly thanked Western allies for supporting Ukraine. Repeatedly. Whenever he has addressed parliaments or senates or other governments across supporting countries, he has always made a point of showing gratitude. But I think what the Americans really mean by gratitude, by Americans, I'm talking about this administration, is blackmail. We want to take your natural resources in return for security. I mean, what do they want Zelensky to do? Get down on his knees and kiss their feet? It's it's disgusting how they treated the man. I mean, they invite him all the way to the United States only to ambush him that way. I think Vance is a complete shit. I mean, what they were throwing at Zelensky was just full of distortions and falsehoods. You want to start World War III? This is something that really, really needs to be put out there. This idea that the Ukrainians are somehow loving war and they want it to continue. And it's absurd. The Ukrainians, and I know from experience, I know lots of Ukrainians at this point. Ask any Ukrainian, they want peace. Of course, they're tired of war. Of course, they're tired of seeing their cities hit by missile strikes, power cuts. Of course, they're tired of seeing the prisoners of war tortured, the women raped, the children kidnapped, the cultural heritage destroyed. There's no Ukrainian in the world that doesn't want to see an end of what's happening. But you'd also be hard pressed to find a Ukrainian who wants to just give it up at any price. Because the thing about surrendering to Putin, the thing about capitulating to Putin, and this really, really needs to be understood, I think, is that it's not a true peace. Because that sort of subjugation, remember, Putin doesn't recognize Ukrainian sovereignty at all. So he's always seen Ukraine as a sort of disruptive Russian vassal state. That's how he sees it. Um, so that really needs to be understood. So I get really frustrated when I hear people lecturing Ukraine about peace. But this is coming from the United States. Obviously, no mineral resource deal went ahead after that. It was a palpably tense meeting, and I mean, it was borderline shouting. It was bad. There will be some that interpret this as that Zelensky was being a rude guest. He's in, the White House, but he was ambushed. I think he was absolutely right to defend himself and his country and to set the record straight. It's worth noting that that's the third time this week that Trump has been called out in his BS. First by President Macron, then by Keir Starmer. I'm pleased that Starmer did push back a bit. They had to set the record straight regarding Trump's lies about, as he put it, loans to Ukraine. That isn't the European position. Countries like Britain and France haven't been loaning Ukraine. This isn't a business deal the way Trump would see it, because European countries are guided by values in this situation. They're guided by the fact that this is a country, a sovereign state that was invaded by a larger neighbour, a neighbour that's shown belligerence to most of Europe, actually. It's shown belligerence to this country. Bear in mind, Russian ultranationalists casually threaten nuclear war on European cities. That's who we're dealing with. It really disgusts me when people basically victim blame and say it's the Ukrainians that are trying to start World War III. It's the Ukrainians that want war. It is such a disgusting distortion of the reality. The Ukrainians are fighting back, of course they are, but they don't want war. They want this to end, but not at the price of just giving up their country. Um, I think the only way this ends is for Russia to completely pull out. Now, being that that's unlikely to happen, at the very, very least, a responsible American president would be putting pressure on Russia and saying, you need to get out of Ukraine, pointing out that Ukraine's a sovereign state. Instead, we have an American president who's completely willing to flatter the Russian leader, to pander to the Russian leader. I am so utterly disgusted. The Democrats, of course, have been absolutely all over this. There was a congresswoman today saying, why will someone have the courage to tell the truth? Russia invaded Ukraine. But I really do think that America can no longer claim to be the leader of the free world. It isn't. It clearly isn't. Someone posting Zelensky is the leader of the free world, and there's a strong claim there. This is a man who has really, really worked so hard to defend his country. Now, in Ukrainian politics, there are divisions. Not everyone supports Zelensky. He doesn't have 100% approval ratings. That's normal. There will be plenty of domestic opposition, but as Ukrainians have pointed out, that's their business. It's not for the American president to dictate. And as has also been pointed out, both Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln had war powers. There weren't elections called in the midst of the American Civil War or during World War II in Britain. Um, so by that logic, both Lincoln and Churchill were dictators. But it's just so perverse that Trump smears Zelensky 1 week. He claimed amnesia now, but he did. He called Zelensky a dictator, and yet he has the gall and the arrogance to say that it's Zelensky that's being disrespectful. As far as I'm concerned, Zelensky's been nothing but statesmanlike in the best way he can. But I don't think Ukrainians would want him to just sit there and take abuse. I think he was absolutely right to speak back and to set the record straight. And anyone with a conscience will be looking at that situation and saying that Zelensky had to do what he done. Because the alternative would be just, taking their insults. JD Vance, I mean, Trump is what he is, but JD Vance is really exposing himself these days. I mean, I'm an absolute shit. I've never liked Trump, but I'm increasingly loathing JD Vance. I think he's someone to watch because he's very young. He's only a year older than myself. He's the Vice President of the United States. He is someone that, if something happened to Trump, if he had a stroke or something, this man would be president. And we're seeing what he is. Musk, Trump, Vance. The Lincoln Project had a good video today showing, it was sort of tongue in cheek as they do, like a Soviet style comradeship thing, and it showed Vance, Rubio, Tulsi Gabbard, and Trump, as great loyal comrades. This is the reality that we're in. The United States of America supposedly has went to the right. It supposedly went to this hard conservative move. Yet, in a way, it's very unpatriotic, actually. That's something that needs to be exposed a lot more. MAGA Republicans are so deluded if they think this is patriotic. I mean, Ronald Reagan would be turning in his grave. He really would. It's such a perverse situation. So I saw a thing earlier saying MAGA actually means Moscow, America, gratitude, something. It was not exact, but I just don't think America is technically the most powerful country in the world. It's the biggest economy. It's the biggest military in terms of expenditure, but it's America's no longer a leader, really, not under Donald Trump. And I really, really, really think that now is the time. European countries need to be coming together like never before. We can't totally avoid America. I've said this before, but I certainly don't think we should be rolling out the red carpet. Let Trump throw a tantrum. We're talking about a 4-year presidency here. Okay, it's not forever. I honestly think we need to. I mean, the special relationship at the moment is. And just to be clear here, I'm not anti American, but I'm very anti Trump. And I think that the reality is, whilst there are millions of Americans who are deeply embarrassed and even disgusted by this, they're not in power, unfortunately. It is Donald Trump and his circus of an administration that is in power. So that's what we're dealing with. And I think in that context, we need to distance ourselves from the United States on some level. What I mean by that is not totally cutting off communications, but really, America can't be trusted right now. I think it's completely self-serving. That was proven by Trump's demands for Ukraine's natural resources. It's just the Trump administration is morally bankrupt. It's just got no moral leadership whatsoever. So I do think that whilst it was good that Macron and Starmer did call out Trump publicly, it is interesting. Trump never berated them in the same way, neither did Vance. Although Vance did try to lecture Europe on free speech, but they didn't lay into Starmer and Macron in the same way. In fact, with Macron, it was all smiles. So I wonder, is that just bully boy tactics in the sense that they deem France and Britain to be, big Western countries, and from Trump's perspective, this isn't my perspective, but from Trump's perspective and Vance's perspective, Ukraine's just a pesky East European country. Why should we care? In fact, Vance is on record as saying, I don't care about Ukraine. He also this week had the arrogance to tell Ukrainian Americans not to show any sort of sentiments towards Ukraine, to give up, to pick one or the other. Now, he would not be saying the same thing to Russian Americans or indeed to Israeli Americans. The hypocrisy of this administration is so obvious. I'm going to leave it there because I'm just going to get more angry. But I am convinced that America's lost moral leadership in the world. It's no longer the leader of the free world. It may be the most powerful country, but I really think if European countries get together, and I do say European countries, along with perhaps some other other players, for example, Japan, South Korea, Canada, Australia, it's really, really time for developed democracies to get together now. Unfortunately, Russian propaganda, and this is obvious, has really, really permeated into many developing countries. And I would urge and implore people in those countries, if your country was invaded by a larger neighbour and you had some of the most powerful countries in the world, we'll say the United States, basically telling you to give up your country, would you do it? If you're a Nigerian or a Kenyan or a Bangladeshi, and the reason I say this is because unfortunately a lot of people from African and Asian nations are endorsing Russian propaganda, and they're actually believing that it's Zelensky and the Ukrainians that are at fault, that they should just give up their country. So I challenge those people, and it isn't universal, I should say. There's plenty of decent people in those countries who know that Ukraine is a victim, but there is certainly a much higher proportion than in European countries, that are taken in by Russian propaganda. Would you give up your country if it was invaded? I mean, look at the history with the European colonial powers. Okay, so you're resentful towards that history, and yet you're telling the Ukrainians they should just give up. Why? Um, I think it's very, very important that European leaders show solidarity with Zelensky at this time. I notice even Kimi Badenoch, who was, really pandering to Trump, she's toned it down now, and she said it's important to be respectful and remember who the aggressor is. Boris Johnson said that. So even some of Trump's allies in Britain are, saying what needs to be said. I don't know what Farage will come out with. He, of course, is on record as saying he admired Putin. So I absolutely wouldn't trust the Reform Party. And the same with the AfD in Germany. I haven't yet made a video about the German election. I don't know if I will. But if I was German, forget all the far right stuff. For me, the issue is, not forget it, but the big red flag is their stance on Russia and Ukraine. I wouldn't trust the AfD. I don't trust Reform. But what I witnessed in the White House, it's astonishing, and I can't think of another example. The closest would be that thing with Nancy Pelosi, but even that was a different context. To invite the man to the White House and then just to ambush him and to insult him and with distortions. I'm pleased that Zelensky held his own. That will hold him in high regard. Here's the irony, Zelensky, like I say, isn't universally popular in Ukraine, but after Trump's insults, that will actually help his ratings because he hasn't sold out. I personally have a lot of respect for President Zelensky. Any leader in his position would be doing what he's done over the last 3 years, trying his level best to get as much support as possible. I defy anyone to imply that their president shouldn't do that in this sort of context when a country's been invaded. And I'll close by saying Slava Ukraini.